Welcome to The Fine Print, a podcast where experts at Succession Resource Group unpack the latest industry trends, recommendations, and observations for independent advisors managing their practice with no fluff and hopefully a little entertainment. In each episode, we'll discuss ways in which you can understand and leverage the value of your business, grow your business through M&A, but also through an optimized organizational structure. Improve and protect your business to create a sustainable enterprise that can hopefully outlast you. And lastly, preparing for your eventual retirement and how to maximize that result. We're not just tackling high-level concepts, hence the title. We're getting into the details, or the fine print. So, we encourage you to listen in with whatever beverage suits your preference, and let's get to the forefront of industry trends with a fresh perspective to help you achieve your long-term business goals. Welcome back to another episode of The Fine Print. This is David Grau Jr., president of Succession Resource Group, leading the conversation today with Jeff Concepcion from Stratos Wealth Holdings, a large independent RIA organization that works very closely with its affiliated advisors, as Jeff will elaborate on more here momentarily. But I was excited to see if Jeff would come chomp it up with me today on a topic that I know we talk about a lot through valuation and succession planning work and a variety of other solutions and services we provide here. But I know Jeff also, in his role leading Stratos, works very closely with his advisors. And the topic that we're going to focus on is organic and inorganic growth, how to win at both. And so what I'd love to turn the mic over to you, Jeff, and let you give a bit of additional background and context for Stratos, and then we'll get into the dialogue because we both know how impactful growth is to any business. But I want to go laser beam focus on organic growth, going beyond maybe just traditional referral marketing, and then tackle also the inorganic growth as two major growth engines for any business or aspiring business, big or small.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the invite. It's always good to catch up with you, David. The enterprise formed in 2009, and it's comprised of a handful of sub-businesses: Stratos Wealth Partners, which is our hybrid RIA; Stratos Wealth Advisors, which is our pure RIA; Stratos Wealth Holdings, which is the entity that we've invested in many wealth management firms over the years; Stratos Investment Management. So there are a handful of entities under the umbrella of Stratos Wealth Holdings. So around since 2009, probably 900-ish email addresses, probably 150-ish locations across the country, and that's the base of the business.
And I would label you as an not you specifically, but Stratos as an organization. I think the first thing that comes to mind when I think of it is you're an RIA, but you're not the typical sort of retail RIA that I think most folks would think of. As you articulated during your introduction, you all have, I think, hundreds of affiliated advisors, help them run and grow their business. What exactly does Stratos do?
That was a great lead, and I think you captured it. So I had a couple of meetings this morning speaking with potential teams that have an interest in us. One was quite large, 11 billion in assets, and another one much smaller with 650 million. And the way I described it is we're not trying to make any enterprise us. We want to make them a better version of themselves. So it's really all the services, some of which are the kind of need to haves and others would be the nice to haves. The need to haves are the tech stack and the regulatory and billing and finance and all that stuff. And the nice to haves would be the driving talent. We have almost the equivalent of an employment agency here with 10 or 11 folks focused on talent, practice management and consulting, marketing, M&A, business planning. So we're really trying to take firms that are doing a nice job of building their enterprise, give them the focus of being a CEO, focus them on investing in their business and creating enterprise value and providing all the platforms and resources and guidance to help them maximize the value of the business that they're engaged in.
Perfect setup. And I appreciate the lead in there because, again, I know you do a lot for the affiliated advisors and not forcing or hoisting the brand on them, but you guys do have a pretty good brand, great reputation, obviously. I'd say it's a good lead in from the perspective of what I wanted to talk with you about today, which you saw my introduction topic: organic and inorganic growth, how to be successful with both. Because you're even closer connected with it than we are. We don't help folks with organic growth, right? That's A, it's a challenge for any of us as business owners. B, that's not our bailiwick. There's great coaches, great organizations, I think like Stratos, that have some resources around helping folks grow organically. But while we do help on the inorganic side, I feel like, in talking to many of the successful firms out there, yours included and you included in that group, it's not A or B, right? And I don't care what size you're at. If you're at 50 million in AUM, 500 million, 5 billion, I think all along the way, right? It's got to be both a combination of sustainable organic growth engines, plus then sprinkling on some inorganic growth activities. And I promise I'll get to a question here in a moment, Jeff. But when I think about both of those, it seems like when I'm out there at conferences and I get a chance to talk to the advisors directly, it seems like it's one or the other for most folks. And I say that agnostic of firm size. I've got small practices that I get the pleasure of talking to, good lifestyle businesses, and they're just focused on organic growth. And by organic, they mean growth through referrals. It works for them. It's scalable. It's sustainable. Maybe not long term, but it works. But their inorganic growth is the furthest thing from their radar. And then I've got the larger enterprises, not quite your size, large enterprises, a couple billion in AUM, and they're focused on the only way to move that needle is through inorganic growth. Getting back to the question, when I think about the conversations I have with our valuation team, big firm, small firm, when an evaluator is looking at it, the best values you're going to see, the highest multiples of revenue, highest multiples of earnings, regardless of the metric that you use, the most successful firms have both. But those are not two easy things to spin up and maintain. There's a lot of spinning plates for large firms. I guess I'll start with as you think about not Stratos proper, but how if I'm an advisor and I'm with Stratos and I've got my own brand and team, what do you do? How do you help firms maintain that balance? Or what are your thoughts on the balance between those two as firms grow, both the inorganic and the organic growth?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think people default to inorganic
Right.
that might be easier for them. And I like to tell people that inorganic should not be a cure for poor organic growth. It should be a complement to strong organic growth that just takes a business that's already healthy and makes it healthier, right? Because there's a cost associated with the inorganic side. And in most cases, there's very little cost to the organic. And organic is challenging. Not a lot of people do it in the industry in general, broadly. You take a look at most folks' organic growth, and it's fairly anemic. And if it's good, it's because there's some process or system in place that they execute on and they do it with discipline. And it could be something that I would refer to as nesting. They're inside of a large university and they understand that, or a large public company or a health system, and they understand the benefits really well. And they're doing workshops and getting consistent referrals. And or maybe they've got a strategic alliances. There's an accounting firm or property and casualty firm that they're deeply embedded in and aligned with that consistently give referrals, or maybe just an exceptional referral process, which is harder to do these days, right? Most folks, I would say, for a host of reasons, are very marginal in organic growth. And for those who are good at it, I couldn't agree with you more. It creates a much more attractive investment opportunity and a way that someone could get a better and a quicker return on their investment if they can anticipate higher organic growth. So just kind of start there. And you've got all kinds of stuff now where technology is contributing to that and people are harvesting data and harvesting introductions and finding money in motion. So technology puts an interesting wrinkle on the old way we used to think about organic.
When it makes me think, when I hear the sort of the counter argument to inorganic growth, and I'm not a proponent of one versus the other. I really do think it has to be both, to your point, short term and long term. But one of the objections I hear about inorganic growth as something that people want to focus time, effort, and money on ultimately, because it's, yeah, you can structure the deal and it pays for itself, but it costs money. It definitely takes time. Is that organic growth is just so much cheaper given industry multiples out there right now. And I feel like when I hear them say that, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, when they say organic growth is cheaper, I feel like that's probably coming from a place of they're not talking about sustainable organic growth engines for an enterprise. They're talking about the fact that they get referrals and that those referrals combined with market appreciation puts them in maybe the low double digit growth. And I mean, that's good. I'm obviously very proud of any business owner that gets to sustainable double digit growth. But doing it through just referrals to me, I get the argument that it's cheaper, but long term, that doesn't seem like a very sustainable way to grow a business. But this industry, our industry, is just so big on referral marketing. But now we're starting to see like actual marketing strategies employed. What say you in terms of the advisors that you help that would ask these kinds of questions, or maybe even Stratos to some degree?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's ebbed and it's flowed. If I look at some of the largest practices that I'm familiar with in the industry today and people who've built the biggest businesses, a lot of them got there through seminar marketing, which is interesting. I don't really
Hmm.
see that anymore, but some of the most successful shops that I see in the industry, they built themselves off of seminar marketing. You see some people doing it, but you don't see it as routinely or as effectively or consistently done.
Yeah.
Certainly referrals, but referrals to me means something very different than it means to others. When we were trained on referrals, it was a very rigid process. So I think referrals are fine if it's process oriented. What referrals meant to me when I started as a young advisor, my first substantial client was a heating and air conditioning company. And we tell people the very first time that we meet them, we get paid three ways. But the most important of those three is what we refer to as goodwill. And that's if you're pleased and you feel your affairs are better organized than they've ever been before. This isn't investments, right? This is deep planning. If we've given you peace of mind and accomplished things that you haven't previously, we'd ask them to be introduced to other folks that we could provide the same services to. And we plant that seed. And finally, they're making fun of us on the fourth or fifth meeting when we're engaged in the planning process. We know active goodwill, referrals, introductions. So this guy who owned a heating and air conditioning company, and again, this is old school, right? But today you'd use technology. Back in the day, I'd go to the library and I'd print out the 72 companies with the SIC code, and they still exist today, except now it's all online, of heating and air conditioning companies within a 40-mile radius. He knew them all. And I early on in my career, I asked who on this list should I be reaching out to? And they checked six companies. Eventually, I started to ask who should I not reach out to? And they still checked six. Now I'm left with 50 or 60 names to call on. And I'm telling you, this is old school, right? But we'd have on their stationery, they would send out a letter. I would have a book that showed 9 or 10 or 12 or 15 over time, 50 letters. I said, pick a letter. Don't bother to write something. Pick a letter that where the language is comfortable for you, something that you would say. It'll save you the process of writing a letter. It was also creating an affirmation as I saw all kinds of executives and privately held businesses that had sent these letters out. There was this very intentional reinforcement that this is something everybody does. Oh, wow, this is your client. And I'd have the client's permission to be using these letters for samples.
Okay.
So the referrals they were very detail oriented. We look at their accounts receivable, accounts payable, companies in their industry. We only work with business owners, by the way. We look at companies that were inside the same industrial park that they might be housed in. It was a very thoughtful and rigid and process oriented approach, as opposed to keep me in mind or any of this other stuff. Now, today, people are able to use data in a much more efficient fashion to come up with the names, but I don't find most people asking as directly and creating the expectation that this is the most important way that I'm compensated. Because you are so well regarded, David, in our industry, an introduction from you would be worth gold. And you're just building up the client and creating this expectation. That's what referrals meant to us back in the day. Obviously, very different, I think, today for most practitioners.
I love the way you position it there because I've had our advisors in the past that have asked for referrals. And to me, the way you positioned it, maybe it's because you were in your example, fluffing me up as the business owner, making me feel like I would be honoring our relationship by virtue of a referral. But just the sheer ask that I have had in the past personally, but that I hear advisors talking about, disingenuous isn't the right term, but it just feels like it cheapens the relationship. I'm curious your perspective ultimately on asking for the referral because you articulated a very good, clear example where it can be done strategically and maybe even repeatable by the next gen. But asking for the referral versus just creating such an amazing client experience, you don't have to ask for it.
I think you could do the latter and you'll get introductions. But if you do the former, you'll get dozens of introductions. And here's how I did it because I consider myself weak, right? I'm not an aggressive person in that regard. And it's the planning process is what drove it. If I was managing somebody's money, it would be maybe I would ask for referrals. I couldn't do it as passionately. But if I feel like people are dying and I've got a cure, I almost feel like there's a burden of obligation to want to cure everyone that I can cure. So if I sat down with David after 4 months of the planning process and said, you know what? I'm feeling really good right now, and I'm hoping that you are as well. And I want to recount for you what we've accomplished. We revisited your buy sell agreements, and we found this inequity and underfunding and alternative minimum tax. Again, I'm going back to the day, so don't
Yep.
worry so much about the language, but more the concept. We determined that you had a 401k plan and a profit sharing plan. We layered on a cash balance plan that allowed you to put away will allow you to put away $200,000 a year additionally on a pre-tax basis. Or someone who had a cash balance, maybe we were layering in a captive insurance company. What would that do over time? $10 million of income that gets converted from ordinary income to capital gains with massive savings. And we'd go step by step of all the things that we've accomplished. So I'm reinforcing the fact that I would love to be able to provide those solutions, that type of deep value and planning to others to make them, their companies, and their families better prepared for the future. So I was reminding them of all the things that we accomplished as I am. Who else might I help achieve this same type of stability and sophisticated planning and great outcomes? In that context, I made the ask.
Got it. Okay. Which makes sense. And I feel like I'm maybe a little bit in the same boat you are. I'm cut from that same cloth. I would struggle to ask for the referral. And instead, to your point, I would work to try to create a client experience where you feel compelled to refer me. But I could see where maybe a combination of the two could be even more effective.
Yep. Yep. And there are more sophisticated ways of doing it today that are less labor intensive. So if I worked with Cleveland Clinic, is 15 minutes away. It's a university hospital's massive employer in Cleveland, Ohio. I could be doing workshops on site, right on the premise or right across the street at a nearby facility or restaurant, having existing clients, inviting other friends, and just marketing. I could geo fence university hospitals so that every time somebody walks on there, a pop up comes up on their phone that talks about retirement planning and our deeply rooted knowledge in Cleveland Clinic's 403B plans and their benefits and working with Fidelity and there are much more sophisticated ways today, right? It's not so much the hand-to-hand combat that we used to do where you could leverage technology to accomplish the same thing. Strategic alliances was an amazing way. I grew most of my private practice through alliances with a law firm, an accounting firm, and a property and casualty firm. And it was a quid pro quo. I would be directing all my people to these strategic partners, all my clients for work, and they would be directing their clients towards me. And it was just to audit their financial plans, to audit their returns and make sure that they had the right amount of risk embedded in their portfolio relative to what their understanding was. They were gentle referrals, but it was just an audit on the tax work or the legal work, or in my case, the planning and investment work to make sure everything was being done in alignment with the client's expectations were. So those were very valuable for me back in the day, those strategic alliances.
I love the sort of strategic angle here of more actionable thoughts for the folks listening. Because again, audience here is all purely advisors. The referral marketing to me, again, great baseline, but it ties back into some of the complaints, challenges that I have heard from advisors over the last 2 decades of doing this around the succession lens and the complaint that we hear ad nauseum. And you've probably come across this because, again, you're working closely with these advisors in a different capacity, but same end goal, help these folks create sustainable businesses, maybe even enterprises. The current gen, I'll call them Gen 1, they could be Gen 2 at this point, but the current owners, often founders, we create the succession plan, we map it out in the spreadsheet, we got the timeline all done, we figure out the financing and the taxes. This thing is a work of art that we create. But we get towards the end and they say, David or Parker on our team, whoever it is that's consulting with them nowadays, the plan looks great. My concern is as I step away and take my foot off the gas, the next generation can't keep growing this firm like I can. Like they don't have the network you touched on in your example, COIs and strategic relationships. Like they don't have any of these things. And I don't say it out loud, right? There's a lot of things I don't say out loud, believe it or not. But when I hear that and we're talking about succession and they're about to start deploying their succession strategy to share equity on the path towards retirement, if I heard that from you, Jeff, and you said, okay, the succession plan is fantastic, but they can't grow the firm without me. I hear that. What it makes me think is then you're not ready to retire because you haven't gotten the business to a point where it can exist without you. And that's that next step. How do you coach? I know you don't coach advisors specifically, but like, how would you coach advisors on trying to get that next generation either A, ready or get the business ready as option B so that it could keep growing as the owner founders take their foot off the gas? Because you and I both know it's an inevitability for all of us.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And again, it's a very well positioned question. The folks who built firms, the G1, which you've had a lot of experience with, tended to be more gregarious. They tended to be more natural hunters. The people who come in as G2 who never had to hunt to build, they were caretaking something that already existed. A lot of times are absent that natural skill. So if there's not a system or a process that involves technology or a matter of engaging with existing clients to make that ask or doing workshops or something, it's going to be very hard for those businesses to grow. And they'll get some level of business, right? But it's probably
Right.
an again, it might be 2, 3, 4% that just happens organically through the goodwill of clients. But remember, you have clients who are retiring, clients letting off of their assets, clients dying. So as you're attempting to add assets, life is taking assets away in varying degrees. So I think there's got to be something more systematic because it will be less intuitive and it will need to be more prescriptive for that G2. There's got to be a plan. We're going to create an alliance with CPA firms. I spoke to a couple people in the last month, surprisingly, that one today that do radio shows. One of them very effective at bringing in new assets from the radio show. The other one, they see it more as just a branding and retention. It's really expensive for branding and retention. So, unless you're driving new assets, but there are just a lot of interesting things people are doing today. But I think you have to have a system or process because to your point, G2 and G3 by nature tend to be less effective at the organic business development than founders.
I'm curious your
Mm.
thoughts. Would you label that a bad thing? Because I feel like when I hear founders talk about that, that they could take care of the clients. And to your point, maybe some anemic growth, appreciation of the assets, a couple referrals here and there, broke clocks right twice a day. But they label it in that different path, a different set of experiences. I feel like as a negative thing, the next generation can't sell. I don't know, in my opinion, I feel like they have different skills for sure, but I feel like they, in many cases, are stronger operationally, better with, you've touched on it a couple of times, technology. Would you label their lack of ability to sell in that same journey a bad thing for the industry when you fast forward 10 and 20
It,
years?
it only depends on what chair I'm sitting in. If I'm sitting in the chair of a client, I don't think it's a bad thing at all. If I'm sitting on the chair of somebody, a staff person, or if I'm sitting in the chair of an investor, I would say it's a bad thing because I can't pay as much to buy a business, right? And if I don't see some path forward towards growth. So I think the only chair that you'd be sitting in where you'd consider that a challenge would be an investor who's thinking about how do I get a return on my investment as I think about investing in a given business.
Yeah, fair. Which is, again, the easy button then for some folks, especially larger enterprises that have had some amount of success and they've got their Gen 2 ready and maybe some Gen 3 behind them is we can't rely on organic growth because A, Gen 2, Gen 3 isn't great at it. They don't love doing it. They'll still get referrals. We built a great recipe here, a good client experience, but we're going to have to now tap into inorganic growth, whether it's through recruiting, acquisitions, mergers. I don't feel like I know it's a competitive space. There's ways to obviously find deals off market. As the head of a very large organization that has a lot of wins in this category, how, to the extent you're comfortable sharing, how does a normal advisor out there even compete in the inorganic growth space nowadays?
It's tougher. It's tougher only because some of the larger enterprises are equipped, better understand, are better resourced, are better financed to go out and consume and buy practices. I think where the independent acquirer can compete inorganically is just grassroots, right? If there's someone in your community who you know, and there's been this mutual level of respect and admiration for the way you do business, and it's a smaller practice, $100 million practice where you're not going to find a lot of the larger acquirers upstream expressing a lot of interest, I think the individual practitioner can be very effective at buying businesses. I chatted with a couple guys today. Interestingly, they had 130 or 140 million in assets in their business. Nice business. They acquired a book with 350 million in assets. And I was telling them today, you guys have no idea what a game changer that was because it took you from a practice to an actual business and the scale of the revenue and the earnings and the multiples that would subsequently follow. So this little business consumed something larger than itself. And the person whose business they bought, interestingly, was younger than they are and a rainmaker. So now that person's purely rainmaking and they're caretaking. It can work. It can absolutely work. But I think some of it's size driven and market driven. The bigger you get, I think the more complex the opportunity, the higher value of the enterprise, you're going to start to run into competition with people who could just afford to pay more. And they can afford to pay more, not because the underlying business is worth more, but if your business is worth an 8x and they pay 9.5x, it doesn't matter if they're trading at 16 or 18 or 20x. So it's hard to fight those economics of scale.
Yeah, early on, it felt like the financing entry in the industry helped level the playing field for a little while, right? Where you had either 20, 30% cash down payments and the balance was financed. And then you had all of a sudden the bank financing that entered the space. And all of a sudden, firms could show up and they could afford to pay cash because they had the financing behind them. Where maybe the small firms or ones that just hadn't focused the time and effort, they weren't making as competitive an offer because they didn't have access to the same amount of capital. But now it seems like with a handful of good industry lenders committing capital to the space, that's less of a competitive advantage, right? Because most everybody has access to financing now if they're willing to take the risk and sign on the dotted line. So you have to start getting a little bit more creative in getting these deals done and landing them safely. And it's an investment of time and effort. Any suggestions you can offer the audience? They're not going to be competing for the same kind of practices you would be anyway, but that you would offer that they could be maybe a little bit more actionable, right? Because if I'm sitting in front of an audience, big audience, small audience, and you ask who in the audience would entertain the idea of acquiring a practice if it was in their backyard and it would pay for itself, everyone's going to raise their hand, right? And generally, these businesses, I guess you could overpay or structure a deal poorly enough that it wouldn't pay for itself. But most of the deals I see, 3x multiple, 2.5x, 3.5x, or 9 times earnings, whatever the number is, generally buyers are smart enough. They can use Excel. They generally cash flow, right? They may not provide a ton of return early on, but they cash flow. How does a buyer compete nowadays, stand out from the crowd? Like anything that you can think that you would recommend to your Stratos affiliated advisors? If we know the, I don't know, buyer to seller ratio, 60 or 70 buyers per seller, how does an advisor stand out from the crowd? What would you prescribe?
Yeah, I think part of it is for people not everyone, most people say that they're interested in acquiring and then slightly frustrated they really haven't had an opportunity to do. And my response would be that someone's not going to come knocking on your door with their financials in hand, right? So if you know you want to acquire, then you have to actively engage. It's that whole process. Everything's got to be process driven. It's very easy. There are 1,000 list brokers. It'd be very easy for me to know on the east side of Cleveland and Ohio that there are 118 people from the ages of 55 to 75 with anywhere from 50 to 150 million in assets. I just picked my little filter, right? And now that I have that subset, how am I engaging with those advisors? It's easy. It's effortless to have somebody on my staff connect me to them on LinkedIn. It's easy for people in my office or in my firm or in my industry or a wholesaler to make an introduction to people that might feel are like-minded or run their business similarly. It's easy for me to send a note saying, I've heard wonderful things about you. Again, it's very easy to give I've heard wonderful things, David, about the way you run your practice. And people in the industry have more than once told me that they look at us in a very similar category in terms of the way that we really care for the clients and provide deep planning advice and whatever. And I would be thrilled someday just to grab coffee and just brainstorm on best practices and have a new friend in the industry. It's this gentle stuff of not waking up tomorrow wanting to buy a book, but prospecting and developing a pipeline of folks that potentially would be candidates for the future. Because I spend not 50 hours, but 50 minutes every single week on activities that are putting me in front of prospective investment opportunities. And that's where you build that rapport and there's a friendship that could develop over time. This is the long haul, by the way.
Yeah.
And I'm in the business and you are, right, of just building relationships that can develop over time. So I had, again, one of my meetings today, I just said to them, I shared everything that I could share that might be helpful. They said, what's next? I said, there's no next step on my end, but if you think that aligning with a firm versus doing all this stuff on your own could be beneficial, we'll always be there. If you feel that we can be a sounding board to help you, call, ask a question. You're working on a project. You've got an M&A deal. If we can be a sounding board in 10 minutes and add value, we'll gladly do it. It's you're not going to get hit unless you're in traffic. So putting yourself in traffic 50 minutes a week, knowing who your prospects are, and finding ways to engage and connect and have touch points, you're going to end up buying businesses. But if you sit at your door, maybe someone will come knocking, but it's not likely they're going to come knocking with their financials and say what you think about buying my firm.
And I hope everyone who has heard me speak before and just heard Jeff's answer can appreciate the unique perspective that he brings versus I bring, and the way you articulated that, Jeff, because I literally, monthly, if not weekly, and in front of groups who are looking to grow and they're looking to maybe add or inorganic growth to their scorecard, ways to grow that enterprise long term. And my one recommendation for them is just make the time. Don't say you're going to do it. Put it on the Outlook calendar, block out an hour, and whether it's once a week, once a month, hopefully more than once a quarter, but we'll settle for even once a quarter. Put time on the calendar, and all you do for that hour is inorganic growth activities. But then their questions after that are, okay, what do I spend that hour doing? What do I spend 5 hours doing? I feel like that you went right to the core of the answer. What can you actually get out there and do? I didn't hear you say, oh, go buy a list or go sign up on a website. You got a lot more actionable, which again, I have compare that to if I want to grow my real estate portfolio, commercial, residential. I don't go sign up on Zillow or Redfin and sit back and wait for listings to pop up or go shop through the list. I'm shopping with everybody else. I like how you went right past all of that. Have you had success with any of the sort of easy softball approaches, or you just go direct to market and just be out there planting seeds? What have you had the
No,
most success with?
we've had success. We've had success with the traditional methods, but an advisor who really wants to be engaged, there are probably 10 steps. I mentioned two of them, but there are probably 10 steps where we say, do A, B, C, D, or you just do all these things. When I first moved to Cleveland and got into the business, I think I was 22 years old. I found a street that I wanted to live on. And it's old school, but I'm not sure I wouldn't do something similar today. I dropped 30 or 40 mailers in people's mailboxes, said, I'm new to town. I'm looking for an apartment. I would love to live on this specific street. And I ended up with an apartment on that. It's just doing that little extra work. And when I was building my practice, I did the same thing. It's just that little extra effort, because I find you take a look at if anybody's in Major League Baseball, you're not there unless you're good. So what's the difference between someone who's good and someone who's great? I always feel it's that little extra effort that most people aren't willing to do. That grassroots building a list and making the calls and asking for introductions from other people in the industry and going on the websites. It's all the stuff that everybody's doing, but it's a handful of things that nobody's doing that will allow you to have just tremendous results. That little extra effort.
Yeah. And a little bit of extra effort applied consistently, I think can generate
Yes.
some really amazing results. One of my, I could ask you questions all day long and chat with you about this stuff, but I know you're also a busy man. So one of my last couple of questions here is when we think about the silver tsunami folks have talked about, the aging advisor force out there, when folks retire, if there's ever a true silver tsunami of a mass exodus of folks, is yet to be determined. Who knows? I think there's gonna be a lot of folks who just end up retiring in place and you don't even know it. But I don't care how you slice it. There's definitely more deal activity, big firms, small firms. I hesitate to say consolidation, but there are a lot of big firms acquiring smaller firms, whether that's 50 million acquiring 25 million or 5 billion acquiring 1 billion, whatever the numbers are. There's a fair amount of that consolidation, I think, organically happening. And I wouldn't label it a bad thing necessarily, but I'm curious your perspective when I see firms like who was it? United Capital back in the day. My early days of doing M&A, I had a chance to work with the owner, former owners there, do a lot of deal activity at the firm I was at previously. And then they grew and they had a ton of success. And then they eventually, we know the story, sold to Goldman. That for whatever reason then imploded and they broke off and went and started their own independent practices. It seems like there's that cycle in the industry. And I'm just curious your perspective the next even 5 or 10 years. Do you expect more of what people generally label as consolidation? Would you label it a good thing, a bad thing for the industry, and probably your eventual successors?
I think there's some consolidation, but I think what we're going to see more of is concentration.
Yeah.
And the way I would differentiate is you're going to see all group of firms that become really big and formidable and others that are growing at a very nice pace. But you have so many new firms spooling up every year, whether they're RIAs or just going to independent broker dealers. There's just a migration away from that traditional W-2 employee model towards some form of independence. And as long as there are more of those firms being created every year, people breaking away, than there are selling on the independent side and exiting, I think consolidation will happen at a fairly slow pace because you just have all these new entrants into the independent space. But I do think, to your point, you're going to see a concentration where the bigger firms that have figured it out and they can create a great experience and they're just really good at onboarding, and the advisors who come on board feel good. That's super important. I'm happy with the number that I got, but I'm happy with what my life looks like the day after I'm wearing a jersey for this new firm. If you figure that part out, then they're going to tell all their friends and business gets really easy. So I think there'll be degrees of consolidation, degrees of concentration, but there's still so much sitting on the employee W-2 side. That's going to continue, I think, to fuel waves of growth on broadly the independent channel.
Yeah, fair. And so, knowing that there's a spectrum out there of advisory firms, you talk to them, I talk to them. Those of you listening are probably somewhere on the spectrum. You got the kind of pure solo advisor. Maybe they got a support staff or two, but they're the star of the show. They've got a great lean, mean lifestyle practice. And you got those out there like you all at Stratos, where it's grown to be a legitimate enterprise. It strikes me as I hear you describe, not just today, but I've heard you describe it in the past, and folks who have described you and their relationship with Stratos, it seems like there might be a healthy in between, right? Where I don't have to sell out in the literal or implied sense, or stay fully independent all by my lonesome out here on this island. I think that's something like a Stratos provides that as a resource, right? Where we can be together but separate. We can still have some level of autonomy, but compete on size. Is that fair? I know you hate doing sort of the commercial thing, but
No, no, it's 100% fair. We're
okay.
not trying to make anybody us. We want to make them a better version of what they already are themselves by providing them more horsepower, more resources, more capabilities, more solutions. Yeah, so people can go and I tell people all the time, this isn't necessarily it's an answer, but it's not the answer. You could stay on your path on your own. And the way I would evaluate things is, could you go faster, further with a bigger engine? Because for a shop that's got 1 billion in assets, it's a nice business, but there's only so many resources that they can have internally. So how do they partner or purchase the technology and the horsepower and the M&A prowess and the talent? Because you can't build a big business without talent. Shocks me today that we probably have a dozen people that I would say are essentially in talent. And what I mean by talent is talent acquisition, finding G2 advisors and traders and CFPs and ops people. And we have a dozen folks who are helping to place talent in 150 locations across the country. And it's a big deal because you can't grow without talent. Yeah, I think our goal, the core base of our business, was helping other people make their firms as successful as it could be. It wasn't investing in them or integrating them to become W-2 or any of that stuff.
So if we look out the next couple of years, I'm not going to go any farther beyond that because it becomes pretty darn speculative. But when I think about organic growth, inorganic growth, some of the Cerulli studies that I've read over the last couple of years, and you've probably seen the numbers cited too, $10 trillion in assets, 100,000 advisors retiring in the next decade. If I'm an advisor firm listening to this podcast, a suggestion you can provide in terms of creating a firm that can exist sustainably in this industry. They may not be trying to take over the world and become the next Stratos, but they've gotten beyond the simple lean, mean lifestyle business where it's just them and one or two people working from their home office. The number used to be 1 billion. Like I would talk to advisors and they'd say, "Oh, Jeff, if I could just get to 1 billion in A, I would have the A translated the revenue to be able to have the staff, the advisors, the support staff, the tech stack that I need. Like I'll finally have reached space where we can afford to do all the stuff we want to do. We're big enough now we can afford to go buy businesses and people will take us seriously." For firms listening, it doesn't seem like 1 billion's the number anymore. Is there some sweet spot? Because you've been along this journey. Is there a sweet spot now where advisors can finally say, I've made it?
Yeah, I think 1 billion is a fantastic number. I would define anyone who's got 1 billion in assets and to some degree has reinvested in infrastructure and talent as having arrived. And it's a phenomenal
Right?
business.
Yeah.
But the question is, can any 2 or 3 private practice doctors with a beautiful setup compete with the Cleveland Clinic 5 miles away? Where you think about the depth of resources and technology and talent, and insight. So how big do you have to become to really feel like you can go to market to clients with the best of everything in terms of the experience and the solutions and the products, the technology, and even costs? Because the bigger you are, a larger firm might be paying half for the same tools that a smaller firm is paying. And that
Yeah.
kind of filters into the client, the end investor. I think $1 billion, anyone should be super proud of having built a business for with a $500 million in assets. It's a real business. My one piece of advice would be to reinvest, right? Whenever there's a hesitation, reinvest. There's never been a time when, with my arm twisted behind my back and begrudgingly and kicking and screaming and crying and complaining, which I did often, where we made a material investment where it didn't reap tremendous rewards for the business, kind of forgoing the maximization of current distributions and investing in people and talent and platforms and tech. It's propelled growth beyond my wildest imagination. So if we really think about ourselves as business owners, there's no real business that you can run that's healthy and growing where you're not somehow reinvesting. And if you're not reinvesting and growing, you're probably slowly whittling away. So just don't be afraid to reinvest. Whatever you reinvest, if you're thoughtful, it's going to come back to you many times over.
I couldn't have brought that full circle if I had scripted it myself, because where we started this journey, organic and inorganic growth, how to try to be successful with both, the little nugget you just left at the end there, reinvest. The way you can be successful as any business owner, but specifically our audience being advisors on organic growth, invest, reinvest. How can you be successful on inorganic growth? Invest, reinvest, whether that's money or time. So I love that's where you ended up with it, because I couldn't agree more from a growth perspective. However, that growth ends up being driven. It's nice to have the referrals. I get it. And you can definitely, as you articulated, Jeff, and I've heard some other smart industry pundits, Angie Herber, some of her stuff around referral marketing, really make a science out of that. But there are other ways, when I think about it from the succession lens, for Gen 2 and Gen 3 to be able to keep that growth going, organic or inorganic. It's going to take an investment by the current generation. So anyway, I love that that's where you brought it back to. If folks wanted to talk more about this topic, Stratos, pick your brain. I know you're a busy man, but if they wanted to reach out, what's the best way to track you down?
Through our website, through my email, my cell phone, all of it's publicly out there. And I would talk to anybody about anything, always have. And from a bandwidth perspective, always would. And I'll just say this about your shop. I think you've embodied this, right? SRG does a lot more today than it did originally from a service
Right.
offering standpoint. When you add a new service, you lose money because you're investing in people and capabilities and tools that you don't have a revenue stream attached to. But it's only when you make that investment that you create these other facets and other pieces of your business and revenue streams. And you've done exactly the same thing that we've attempted to do and that I think most successful businesses do. You got to believe in yourself and invest in your business. And like I said, you should get that back tremendously.
I can tell you, having talked to you before, obviously, Jeff, but even just spending time here, knowing the role that you play at Stratos and the role that Stratos plays with its affiliated advisors and the success you've had, I got to say, with folks out there like you, the industry is in good hands. For everyone listening, hopefully you got some good, useful information from what Jeff just shared, because growth is foundational to the value that you're building. Whether you're building a great book of business or a great enterprise, it doesn't really matter. Both of them require growth to get there. And so, with it being such a fundamental part, I appreciate Jeff being able to jump on, share some very specific and actionable insights with the audience. Everybody, appreciate you listening to another episode of The Fine Print. Jeff, I appreciate you carving out time for me this afternoon and for our audience. We look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks, everyone. And that concludes another episode of The Fine Print from SRG. We hope you found this episode both interesting and valuable. We encourage you to check out our website at www.successionresource.com. And of course, connect with us on social media for the latest happenings here at SRG. If you just can't get enough of The Fine Print, we invite you to join our monthly webinar series and newsletters where we address many of the topics covered in this podcast in greater detail. Finally, if you enjoyed today's episode as much as we did recording it, please leave us a review, a good one, mind you, and tell your industry friends about us. Your support helps us continue to bring you the best content possible. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guests or individual hosts and not necessarily the views or opinions of Succession Resource Group. Content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional advice, as amazing it might be. Always seek the advice of an expert with any questions you may have. As always, we at SRG stand ready to help when you're ready.